Well, it will soon be illegal in Illinois to discriminate against someone based on their reproductive health decisions. A new law takes effect January 1st.
It bans employment and housing discrimination based on decisions surrounding abortion, birth control, or fertility treatment. Capitol Bureau Chief Max Cotton explains.
Illinois' Human Rights Act will soon protect people's reproductive health decisions thanks to a new law taking effect January 1st.
It amends the Human Rights Act to protect an individual's reproductive health decisions from discrimination or retaliation in the context of employment, housing, public accommodations, education, and financial credit.
Fine says under the law, reproductive health decisions don't only mean pregnancy-related choices. Yes, someone's past decision whether to get an abortion will be covered. So will family planning choices like whether to take birth control or sterilization or use holistic or alternative medicine.
It would be a violation, for example, for an employer to terminate an employee for seeking in vitro fertilization, a housing provider to refuse an apartment rental because a person had an abortion, or a bank to deny a loan because it is going to be used for fertility treatment.
The law's opponents fear it could limit people's First Amendment rights. Though it has exemptions for religious organizations, it does not exempt groups like nonprofits that may have a faith-based mission but are not directly affiliated with a denomination.
There is a right of association under the First Amendment, and it allows the freedom to associate with others who have similar political, religious, and cultural beliefs. And I fear that this is exactly who this bill is targeting, is organizations that aren't affiliated with one religion, but they are formed for a purpose and to associate with those who have a similar religious belief.
Tracy says crisis pregnancy centers are an example of organizations that could be affected by the new law. In Springfield, Max Cotton, WGEM News.